Hello, I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer. Welcome. This is a very special episode today. And as you can tell, everything is just upped a little bit. We're in a new environment that's lovely. We're using some different camera angles than normal. And I have a guest, an individual who is no stranger to this channel and one of my dearest and closest friends, John Norberg of Norberg Wealth Management. We're in your office. This is your environment. Thank you so much for welcoming me today, John. I'm glad to be with you.
It's a true pleasure to have you here again, Garrett, my dear, dear friend. I'm glad that you were able to take time out of your busy schedule here in Maryland as we prepare to celebrate our country's 250th anniversary. And I know that's going to be part of our talk today. So I'd love to hear kind of what thoughts have been percolating in that doctoral mind of yours as we get into today's discussion. I'm curious, as we do enter into this 250th anniversary, what should we be thinking about?
Yeah, well, here we are now. We were kind of thinking about this a little bit earlier. Around this time of year, 250 years ago, some big stuff was going on in this part of the country, the Mid-Atlantic Northeast region. Mm-hmm. And just thinking back to our forefathers, the founders of this nation, this whole idea of independence, to be free from the shackles of oppression, to be free from oppressors and tyranny, this sort of thing. Definitely important to be attentive to and to consider. Mm-hmm. But then one of the things that you and I had just sort of casually visited about when we were talking about doing this recording is, what do you do with freedom? So being free from oppression, being free from injustice is one thing, but what about this idea of being free for, freedom for something? And maybe we can just spend a little bit of time reflecting on this idea of freedom for excellence. And what do we really do with our freedom? What does freedom really mean? Because look, you and I, we've been free because we live in this country. But we're free to pursue things which we find fulfilling. We're free to pursue a relationship with our family, with our clients. We each have our own businesses and we each are trying to flourish in that way. And we have some opportunities here to exercise freedom in a way that other people in other parts of the world may not have. So let's just talk about that a little bit. When you think about your own experience of freedom, and especially the freedom to flourish and to thrive, how has that looked for you, or how do you think about that?
That is a fantastic and a very deep question. I'm reminded a little bit of our forefathers when they were getting ready to sign the Declaration of Independence and the leap of faith that must have taken. Mm-hmm. How did they think about that question? One has to wonder. And when I consider it these days, I've got to think that maybe some of the classical definitions of freedom, of liberty, must have gone through their minds. I mean, these men were thinkers, clearly. Yeah. But what I'm reminded of is, if they were seeking to, as you said, be free from oppression, to throw off the shackles of the redcoats of Britain and injustice, no taxation without representation, all of those things. Yeah. It wasn't just freedom from something, I've got to think, so much as freedom to do something that they were working towards. The idea that, mm-hmm. And you see this in law, particularly natural law, all the time, that every right that we have, like a right to freedom, to liberty, has oftentimes that correlative duty attached to it. So once we attained our freedom, with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, of course, what happened next? I've got to think that the forefathers were probably, at least in some respects, thinking ahead to what that was. Well, now it's a freedom to do something. To do what? Well, perhaps to define what a better model of government might look like, to show how leading a nation in a better way might look like, that they were striving for from the moment they affixed their signature to that declaration to the moment that they started setting up. I mean, you and I love Hamilton, right? And it's kind of interesting to see kind of both sides of that coin, how they started out with the fight for freedom, but then also what happened after that. Right. How do we lead well? How do we be free and serve that freedom well so that it does not rule us with utter chaos?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. And I think it's one thing to have that thought about on a large scale. What does it look like for a nation? But it can absolutely and absolutely is a question that each individual has to kind of wrestle with, has to experience, has to think through. What do I do with this freedom? What does it look like? I spend a lot of time having discussions around this in my role as a counselor, as a therapist. We spend a lot of time with people who are trying to exercise freedom, but a lot of times the stressors that people present with in the clinic is because they are in fact not free. I think about my folks who are dealing with addictions to drugs, alcohol, phone, pornography, whatever a person may really be struggling with. There's the sense that I'm free. I'm free to do this. I can make this choice. And in this country, yes, you absolutely are free to do some of these things. You can go and buy alcohol. You can scroll on your phone and get things on Amazon. You can do all of this stuff. You are free to do it. But should you? And when it becomes so habitual that now it's become almost an addiction, at this point, are you really free? Or is your freedom being taken away by this thing, whatever it might be? So what you've just alluded to, big picture on a national level, a governmental level, that individual question of what truly makes me free is something that we are all trying to wrestle with and trying to cope with and trying to make sense of.
Yeah, no. And again, to bring it back a little bit to the form of government that, was kind of the beginning of the conversation around freedom and our country's founding 250 years ago, I think oftentimes a lack of intentionality can be behind so much of what goes wrong. Yeah. Okay, yes, you're free. You get your first smartphone, right? All of a sudden, you find out that you can go to all these websites and scroll forever and ever. Or even worse, there are so many things that can go wrong because of that lack of intentionality. And then all of a sudden what happens, we find ourselves in shackles. So It might be, to draw the analysis or the analogy, you look back at, I imagine that when Britain colonized America in the first place, the first British Americans didn't say to themselves, hey, we want to throw off these British oppressors. But it was over time that it became clear to them that, hey, we are actually in shackles, and it's time we were intentional, that we did something about it. So I'd be curious, seeing both back then and now, that there are many different ways that we can find ourselves, again, under oppression or in shackles or essentially not free. What are ways we can be intentional? What are ways that we can live that life of virtue that I think ultimately both the founding fathers and we ourselves in our own small way, as fathers, as husbands, as American citizens, are at least trying to strive for, to aim for?
Yeah, right. These are the kinds of questions that we approach all the time with folks in therapy. How are we more mindful of in the ways that we're free and what we're doing with that freedom? I think one thing is just identifying those ways that we are not really free, calling out the stressors that I may have in my own life, the things that may be going on that are actually restricting my freedom, my ability to thrive and flourish. That awareness is an important first step in the process. And then taking action on it, that's something that has to follow. And it doesn't necessarily happen in the snap of a finger or overnight. A lot of times in the context of therapy, it takes some time. But I think that like you say, that intentional piece, that mindful piece of what's really going on for me. You said something that made me think about the importance of connecting the idea of freedom to the reality of truth. Where is freedom if it's not rooted or grounded or centered in real truth? And I think about like the Christian background of so many of our forefathers and the Christian values that have transcended the American spirit for the last 250 years. I can't help but think that something about this idea of what is really true, does that not also connect to the human understanding of what truly makes a person free. What are your thoughts?
That is another one of those deep questions that we could be here, I think, spending hours upon hours. I don't know that the viewers would forgive us for that. But I am reminded, I'll try to keep it succinct to one point. Your question reminds me of the definition of the liberal arts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's often forgotten that liberal arts has its name in part thanks to the fact that by knowing these arts, if you will, you are liberated from your base nature, your compulsion to scroll on your phone, as the case may be, or to follow your natural animalistic appetites without any thought to what you're doing or why you're doing it. So I think being able to grasp even at those fundamental truths of what it means to be human is probably something that not only back in 1776, but also nowadays, those men, as we, and I would hope any good man, give some thought to as to how they lead their lives, that intentionality and that search for truth being one of, if not the primary governing factors. For how might a man govern others if he cannot first govern himself, his appetites, and frankly, what he does with the moments of his day? So would there be any practical advice that you might share in there? I know you work with your clients all the time in areas like this. I myself, from a selfish standpoint, would love to hear if there's anything that you tell people in these situations to pursue or advice that you give just on a general basis even.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind is this idea of what can really make us truly free is a sense of having a capacity for restraint, for self-discipline. I think about like some of the great pianists, like an Andras Schiff or some of these folks. They can be expressive and artistic in their interpretations of Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, and they can do that because they've spent years and years of painstaking labor honing that craft, tailoring their skills. They're free to have this kind of expressiveness because they have exercised self-discipline. They've followed the rules of music. They've devoted the time. By doing that, they've restricted their ability to do some other things. But look at the freedom now that they have and the ease with which they can interpret and perform music. I think too about there's a great study from years and years and years ago. There was a guy named Walter Mischel, and he was a researcher, and he did marshmallow experiments with young children. And if you've ever heard of that, it was the neatest thing. He would take young children, 4, 5, 6 years old, and there were many iterations of this experiment. But one of the most famous ones is he would present them with like a piece of candy, a marshmallow, an M&M, something like that. And he would give the small kid an option. You can have this now, or if you can wait, you can have 2 or 3 a little bit later. And it was just interesting because the research showed that the young people who were able to delay gratification, that instant gratification of I want the candy now, the young people who were able to wait, over the course of time, they tended to do better with a lot of things in the course of their life. They tended to be better with relationships. They tended to do better professionally. They tended to do better academically. So the longitudinal results of that study were pretty fascinating. Now, others may argue, well, what about striking when the iron is hot? I have candy right here, right now. Why shouldn't I take it? But I think this idea of tempering freedom with a sense of, is this what's really best for me at this time? Is this what's really going to make me happy? Is this what's really going to make me free? So we have all these options. We have all these choices. As grown-up adults, we're not kids, but that same kind of idea of the marshmallow experiment, we experience something like that all day, every day. I can pick up my phone right now and I can start doom scrolling. I can go to Target or Walmart or the mall and buy all kinds of things.
Rather than putting that money in my 401k.
For example, yes. We're free to do all kinds of things. But should we? Like, should I do all these sort of things? Is that's what is truly best for me? And so when I think about helping people get on a trajectory where they're really able to flourish, where they're really able to truly be free, sometimes it means having that discussion of how do I exercise self-discipline? How do I exercise some restraint? It's almost like a juxtaposition, because in a sense it's restricting our freedom a little bit, but it's making us truly free. And as I think about like our Catholic Christian anthropology and worldview, it's not unlike, say, the disciplines of Lent or the penances that we do.
Yeah.
We inflict these penances upon ourselves because we believe that we're doing it in imitation of Jesus himself, who fasted, who abstained, who prayed. And in the one sense, it can seem like this is restricting. It's hard. It's not easy to do. But does that mean we shouldn't do it? I think it really makes us truly free. And I know that you've experienced that, and I've experienced that as well. So, yeah, I'm interested to hear your perspective when we talk about this exercise of true freedom and restricting ourselves a little bit, exercising self-discipline. How have you noticed that really be fruitful in your own life, personally or professionally?
Yeah. I think it's something that sometimes we see as externally visible, like somebody who follows a good exercise and diet plan probably isn't going to look like they eat McDonald's every day for lunch, not to pick on, one of America's institutions. But on the other hand, sometimes it can be more subtle. Someone, the millionaire next door type who actually did defer that gratification, who was intentional about living virtuously and not indulging their Amazon or their Walmart or their Target habit. Yeah. And now what do you know? They've got a couple million in a couple of retirement accounts.
Yeah.
So that level can have both visible and non-visible manifestations. But I think ultimately it's about how, for me, how do I govern myself, body and soul, such that ultimately as a Catholic Christian, we attain that eternal happiness that cannot be described. So things like Lent are very good for that. You and I did Exodus 90 together this year, which was a really good example of discipline shared. That brotherhood really helped. So, one thing that I'll just simply say from my own personal observations is I have found when I'm struggling, it really helps to have a brother or someone you can really trust and rely upon to bring you to that next level. And you bring each other, right? It's a togetherness. And I think that's, again, bring it back to the founding fathers.
Correct.
Part of what made that such a huge moment was because they knew they could rely on each other through thick and thin. We must all hang together or else we shall hang separately, as one of them famously said, right?
Yeah, absolutely right. And just as you say that so eloquently, it reminds me too of the sacred scriptures. For freedom you have been set free. And St. Paul in the letter to the Galatians,
yes,
asks, don't use your freedom to consume. Don't use it as a way of becoming enslaved to the passions of the flesh. For freedom's sake, you have been set free. So really thrive and flourish in freedom. Do those things that are going to help you be more free. And the fact that you bring up this idea, this sense of community, we don't exist in a bubble. I want to do what's right for me to flourish, and I want to see others experience that flourishing, that ability to thrive as well. It's such a beautiful thing, and it's just great to get to think about this stuff as we get close now to the 250th anniversary of our country. And I'm just thrilled to be here with you. It's such a pleasure to have this conversation with you. And the work that you do as a financial planner, financial advisor, I think when you've spent some time talking about financial freedom, that is absolutely a part of the human experience as well. And I know as a psychologist, a lot of times financial stressors are something that can be really challenging for folks to work on or work through. So I know that some of my viewers would appreciate your services. So I hope that if you are in need, you'll look up Mr. Norberg, John Norberg, Norberg Wealth Management. He's been such a dear friend to me, and my family trusts him, and I imagine that others benefit from your services as well.
You're too kind, my friend. And likewise, for those of you who haven't watched any Gospel Minded or this series before, like and subscribe. This guy's got some absolutely fantastic things to say that in the mental health sphere can be equally, if not more, important. Because again, as another famous fellow once said, if you haven't got your health, you haven't got anything.
Well, I really appreciate the conversation, John. Thank you for welcoming me to your office here today. Thank you so much for sharing this time together. And we've said you've been on this channel a couple of times now. No doubt we'll have an opportunity to talk again in the future. But thank you for this time today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
All right. That's it. Thanks for joining. See you next time. I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer. Take care.